Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. We have a really great show for you tonight. 1 week before the midterm elections, we're talking about voter suppression with one of the experts in the nation on voting and voter suppression, Greg Palast. How you doing, Greg?
Getting by.
Awesome. All right, I'm just going to read a couple of things from your bio here. In September of 2016, before the U.S. presidential elections, you released your movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, A Tale of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, based on your New York Times best-selling books predicting Trump's election. And then you updated it, and I remember seeing a rough cut of the update. So the film is now called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, The Case of the Stolen Election, and that was released a year ago this month. You have many books. They've been translated into 24 languages. You've written many investigations. You uncovered the theft of the 2000 U.S. presidential election in Florida, exposed the financial vultures attacking Argentina, Congo, and other nations, the hidden story of BP's Deepwater Horizon blowout, the Bush administration's secret pre-invasion plans for the oil fields of Iraq, U.S. involvement in the attempted coup d'etat against Chavez, and an undercover expose of Enron's purchase of British government favors. So thank you so much for being on the show tonight to talk about Georgia and some of the other states that you've been working on. But I want to roll in a clip that Robert Greenwald from Brave New Films did, a very short clip summarizing the situation in Georgia.
Growing allegations of voter suppression are emerging in the hard-fought race for governor in Georgia.
I look at these mailers that are telling me and two of my children that if we did not fill out these forms and return them, we were going to be moved to the inactive list.
Marsha Appling Nunes discovered she was no longer registered.
It was unnecessary that I had to go through so many hoops.
Nearly 70% of voters with pending status are black in a state that's only 32% black.
Lilith Walters had no idea her absentee ballot was rejected until CNN called her.
I wouldn't have known.
And you would not have voted in this election?
No.
Black voters in Gwinnett are more than twice as likely as a white person to have their ballot rejected.
Dozens of black senior citizens southeast of Atlanta were ordered off a bus bound for the polls for early voting.
The votes are being purged.
More than 50,000 voter registration applications are on hold.
Brian Kemp now being a candidate and reaping the benefits of all of the manipulation and all of the voter suppression that he's engaged in for years. He's effectively choosing the people who are able to participate in this election and choosing the voters who may ultimately elect him.
It's something that continues to concern us, especially if everybody uses and exercises their right to vote.
300,000 African Americans purged from the rolls, 30,000 in Fulton County, 28,000 in Clayton County, 40,000.
This is the kind of intimidation, voter intimidation, that has always been going on in the Deep South.
I want them to remember that people died for that right.
Okay, well, it's pretty dire. In researching this show, I read that between 2012 and 2016, 1.5 million voters were purged. Apparently, 670,000 were purged last year, about half of them because of this use it or lose it law, and the other half because of the 340,000 that were purged by postcard. So can you describe the different kinds of purging that's been done in Georgia?
Okay, for Salon.com and for Rolling Stone, I've been investigating Georgia for 5 years, and I uncovered 340,134 people were removed from the voter rolls of Georgia by Brian Kemp, who's the Secretary of State and also running for governor, on the grounds that these people had moved. And what's their evidence of their moving? You mentioned use it or lose it. You cannot lose in the United States of America. You may not lose your vote because you didn't use it. You can only lose it if they believe it you have moved. And they use your non-voting. Plus, they send you a postcard, which looks like junk mail. And if you don't return the postcard and you miss a couple votes, then they remove you from the voter rolls. Now, I did something unusual. I hired a company, Cohere One, and a whole group of consultants and through a threat of a lawsuit, and by the way, I sued Brian Kemp in federal court last Friday. In this lawsuit, we were able to obtain all the names and addresses of everyone purged because they supposedly left Georgia or moved their congressional district. I hired these companies, and they went through name by name by name. We're not guessing. It's not a scientific sample. It is the entire list, name by name, using computers. And we can tell you with absolute dead certainty that 340,134 voters have not left Georgia, have not moved. They're exactly in their registration place. And people like a Dewan Mitchell of Savannah, he's an African-American veteran. He voted for Obama in 8 and 12. He was overseas. He skipped voting in 14 and 16. Somewhere along the line, missed a postcard. And now he wants to vote in this election, but he couldn't. He was on the purge list. You go to gregpalast.com, type in your name, and if you're a Georgian and you can see your purge, he did on the last day of registration, he re-registered. But there are 1/3 million Georgians who've had zero notice that they've been purged from the voter rolls. And that's what I was able to uncover and try to get into the U.S. press. We did have a Fox News reporter who took my report on the 340,000 missing and put it under Brian Kemp's nose. I tried to put it under Brian Kemp's nose, but then he wouldn't talk to me. He's refused to talk to me for 5 years, so I simply followed his campaign bus to a pig roast in Noonan, Georgia, try to ask him about the purging of 1/3 voters, most of them African Americans, voters of color. And he had two guys with Smokey the Bear hats grab me and throw me off the property. That was his response. But when he was in Fox News, it was harder for him to avoid the question. He still didn't answer it. And by the way, I want to tell you that this method used by Brian Kemp, he's the worst, but it's used in 26 states, mostly GOP states. And so while I'm reporting about Georgia, and if you saw the Rolling Stone articles by me and about me, I'm reporting these things in Georgia, but it's happening all over GOP America, Nevada, Nebraska, Indiana, Colorado, wherever the GOP has control of the voting lists, they're throwing people off by sending them these postcards. If they skip election, they get a postcard, they miss it, they lose their vote. It is overwhelmingly poor students, people who vote, who rent. That's who they're getting rid of. And it is the most vicious Jim Crow attack I've seen in my 20 years of reporting on the issue.
Well, I've read that since Shelby versus Holder, which was the Supreme Court decision that eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, 99 bills have been introduced in 31 state legislatures. And, you know, they also have felons. They can't vote in Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky, although I think that in Florida there's a proposition on their ballot to fix that. And apparently those felons cover 28% of eligible African Americans. And, you know, the Supreme Court since then, they've declined to hear a North Carolina case that would reinstate voter ID law. In North Dakota, your ID has to have a street address, even though many just have post office boxes. And this doesn't.
If you live on a reservation, that's right. And
yeah.
That's not just North Dakota. That's New Mexico, where I saw that in the Pueblos. People don't have regular street addresses. Their addresses are like next to the gas station. And suddenly that's costing them their right to vote. In South Dakota, which is in which Native American natives are a big part of the population, voting population, same in New Mexico, same in Colorado. We're seeing this nationwide. You mentioned 99 laws. Those are all laws meant to restrict the right to vote. And you're seeing a massive, massive purge. When I say purge, that means that people are being canceled off the voter rolls. And so then you also have in Florida, as you mentioned, my first investigation in this area, I was working for the BBC television and the Guardian newspapers of London. And what I was able to find out, I got, just like I did with Brian Kemp, getting a list of canceled voters. I got the list of voters canceled, purged by Catherine Harris back in 2000, who claimed that there were 58,000 felons on the Georgia voter rolls who are not allowed to vote because they're ex-cons. What I found out is almost all of them were African American, including a guy named Willie Steen, for example. It's a veteran who, in fact, had served in the war was not a felon, worked in a hospital, and yet he lost his right to vote. He was one of 58,000. That's what elected George Bush president in the year 2000. Not the voters, but removing tens of thousands of black voters. Bush only won by 537 votes.
Wasn't it a fact that Gore did win when they finally did do the recount?
Well, here's what happened. I mean, first of all, they didn't include those 58,000 who never got to vote. That was mostly African Americans. So if they were allowed to vote, it wouldn't have been close. Also, when they did what was called the recount, it was really counting votes that were never counted. 178,000 votes were literally discarded. That's what the recount was. It was all those 178,000 ballots which had what they called hanging chads and other problems. And there's a hanging chad. What is a hanging chad? You punch a card. They had punch card voting. You punch a card. It has, you can see that someone's voting for Al Gore, but a little piece of the cardboard is sticking to the bottom. You know that was a Gore vote, but they say, oh, that's a hanging chad. We can't count that vote. And we saw that, by the way, in Ohio in 2004 with punch cards and the hanging chads. In Republican areas, they hired people to scrape the chads off. I'm not kidding you. But in Democratic areas, you lost your vote. And now in Georgia and in 2016, by the way, you see a similar situation in my film, Best Democracy Money Can Buy. You will see that 75,000 people, in fact, 75,355 voters in Detroit did not have their votes counted because 87 machines broke down. And while it's paper ballots, it was machine counting. The machines didn't read their votes, so they threw those votes away. They didn't count those votes. And they said, well, we don't know who people voted for. In Detroit, really? Motown? Who did vote for? Trump? Those 75,000 ballots would have given Hillary the election because Trump only won Michigan by 10,000 votes. So this continuing Jim Crow operation continues on. And I know you're bringing on Tim Canova, which is wonderful because he has a different idea of one way to solve this problem is to have an opposition party. Right now we have the Democrats, but they're not in opposition. They are not talking about the suppression of the black vote, the removal of voters from the voter rolls. They're not trying to protect those voters in any way. And that's a big problem. I mean, when I say the Democratic Party, I want to be clear about it. It's not black Democrats. Stacey Abrams has talked about my work and made a point that her opponent, Brian Kemp, is illegally removing voters from the voter rolls. But my problem is the Democratic white congressional caucus, and that's our big problem. And I'm glad that you're going to have Tim Canova on. I've got to get on to my other work, but I appreciate this is wonderful, a chance to talk with you about this.
Oh, I got a couple more questions I need to ask you about.
Right ahead,
well, first of all, the cross-check program, which you talked about in your documentary, Chris Kobach and those different names, like just with a different middle initial. How much is that cross-check problem coming into the midterm election?
Well, we figured that it cost Hillary, well, it cost about 1.1 million votes in that election. Hillary would have absolutely won that election if not for this trick called cross-check. What it is a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas. He's the Republican Secretary of State there, but he's running a whole operation for the GOP vote snatchers around the country, and it's called Interstate Cross-Check. What he does is he sends out a list of people he says have moved out of their state or even voting twice because they're voting in two different states because they're registered in two states. But who are these people? I got the list, by the way, from Brian Kemp's office. And what do you have? You have a guy in Detroit named James Brown, and believe it or not, a guy in Atlanta named James Brown. They said, oh, it must be the same voter, even though one is named James Thomas Brown, one name's James Edward Brown. They're using common names, first and last name matches, to say people have moved or voting in two states. They removed those voters. That cost Hillary, I'm not kidding, you can go state by state, that cost her the election 16. In this year, I have no doubt, we know that in Georgia, Brian Kemp removed 108,000 voters on the cross-check list saying they've moved. According to the post office, only 2,000 out of 108,000 have in fact left the state. So that's a trick. That's just cross-check. That's big in Georgia. That's big in Colorado. That's big in Nevada where there's a tight race. That's big in Indiana where there's a tight race. And in fact, in Indiana, the attorney for the state of Indiana, which is Republican control, admitted to my lawyers who've been basically getting the material out of them, admitted to my lawyers that Indiana was removing people who are on the cross-check list in violation of federal law. That's very serious stuff, and we uncovered it. And yet, the mainstream press, forget about it. Hear no evil, see no evil, at least when the evil is perpetrated on the black voter.
Washington Post actually just did a story about this, their media reporter, on how it's only been covered for like 10 minutes in this entire election season, this voter suppression. Now, you found 769,000 voters who'd been purged in Colorado, 550,000 in Illinois, 90,000 in Vegas and Reno. Now, you're actually posting these lists for people to go and see if they've been purged. Now, tell me, where did you post them in time for some people to re-register? And if not, what are you advising them to do?
Two things. We tried. Remember, these lists are not my lists. I had to blast them out of the offices of the Secretaries of State, these GOP officials, through threats of legal action, federal lawsuit. So they all stalled till the last second. I only had 2-3 days before Georgia shut down when we put up 500,000 names in Georgia. And some tens of thousands of people were able to save their vote by finding out they'd been removed from the voter rolls. Illinois, the same thing. Nevada, the same thing. The problem is that in most of these states, if you go to gregpalast.com, we just added Arizona today. Registration is closed. However, I want you to know if you've been purged so that you can then go into your polling station. You probably won't get a polling, a little card that says, here's where you vote. Probably wondering why. That's because you have been removed from the voter rolls, canceled. Do go into your voting station. Do bring ID, a photo ID, something with your address on it as well, say a utility bill or bank statement, and demand a vote. They'll probably give you a provisional ballot. The chance of it being counted is pretty slim, but I want you to do it for two reasons. In Georgia, we're thinking of bringing legal action if we're expecting 50,000 provisional ballots. If that's what is electing Brian Kemp, not counting those ballots, we're going to go to court and demand those ballots be counted. Second, go to gregpalast.com. If you find out you've been purged, send us a note saying, I was on the purge list. We need to know this so we can fight this in court. We need to know that, yes, I have not moved from this state. I'm in Arizona. I'm in Illinois. I'm in Indiana. They've removed my name, and I want to know about it. So we have to fight it, because this is as much about 2020 as it is about next Tuesday.
Great. Well, thank you for all your work, Greg. I've got Tim Canova in the lobby, so I'm going to say goodbye to you. You can go to your another engagement, and thanks for all your great work.
You're very welcome. Bye.
So now I have Tim Canova, who I've known for a couple of years now, and he is in the last week of his race. We're going to bring him into the broadcast. I hope that Tim Canova needs no introduction, but in case he does, he is running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz for Congress in Miami-Dade County, Florida. And he just recently, in fact, when I was in Florida in the spring, I was there to live stream his announcement where he left the Democratic Party to run as an independent. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well, Lauren. Thank you for having me on. One small correction is that in addition to Miami-Dade County, a big part of our district is Broward County.
So that's a big county. How many voters in that county?
I think Broward now has the most Democratic voters in the states, in the state of Florida. I think it's around 600,000 in Broward now. I don't remember exactly, but it's a sprawling district I'm in. It starts in the south along the beach area around just north of Miami Beach, Surfside, and then goes up through a bunch of beach communities all the way up to Hollywood Beach, where I am, and Dania Beach, and then it heads west all the way to the Everglades, the edge of the Everglades in Weston and Pembroke Pines.
You're 2 years into running for this office. Tell us what it's been looking like for the last couple of weeks.
It's looking very positive, extremely positive. I think running as an independent was a wise move. I got a lot of flack for it. Part of it were people trying to say they knew the strategy better than we know it here. Look, I just went with my gut when I went independent, but I'll tell you what's happening. Wasserman Schultz's unfavorability ratings None of the newspapers have published this, but I'm hearing through the grapevine that there are unpublished Republican polls that show her disapproval rating is up around 60%. In a three-way race, that makes it very tough for her. She has a low ceiling. And we have a lot of Republicans who are suddenly coming our way. A lot of people in this county who might not agree with a lot of, let's say, my domestic agenda, right? A progressive agenda. But they're looking at it as insider versus outsider, as integrity versus corruption. Broward has been a one-party state for a long time, and it's abused that kind of power. I mean, the Democrats have that kind of monopoly power under Wasserman Schultz's leadership. So Republicans are dying for change. There are a lot of independents in this district. I think the demographic breakdown is that there's almost as many independents as as Democrats now, and there are less than 25% of the voters here are Republican. So the Republicans stand no chance to even come in second in a three-way race, and they're beginning to get that. So there's a lot of great energy. I like our chances on the ground a lot. The bigger challenge, maybe, I shouldn't say the bigger, there are two challenges. You know, one is to win a three-way race against a well-funded corporate incumbent, and the other is to make sure the votes are counted and there's no, no rigging going on.
I want you to explain for the viewers who are not familiar with the situation, even though I've had you on my show before, I've got new viewers.
Yes.
What happened with the last election? Just really briefly. And is it worrisome that the woman who did this to you, what you're about to describe, is now out campaigning with Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
Yes, it is worrisome. And what happened in a nutshell, our last campaign was epic. We raised a lot of money in small donations. I plowed most of it back into the field. We had 4 field offices, and between full-time field organizers and deputy field organizers and volunteers and paid canvassers, we had probably 250 people knocking on doors every day. And we were knocking on 10,000 to 12,000 doors a week. So that's a lot of information to go into the Van voter database. And our internal numbers showed us doing very well at the end. When we ended up losing by 13 percentage points, I found it not quite believable. But, you're told by everyone, all the experts and all the consultants, that you can't contest an election when you lose by more than 10 points or even lose by more than 5 points. Everyone will call you a sore loser. But, my gut was telling me something was wrong. And then we started hearing from a lot of election integrity experts who were studying the results. And they had serious doubts about the official results. So I put in a public records request with the Broward County Supervisor of Elections. And a long story short, they stonewalled us for months. I filed a lawsuit. While the lawsuit was pending, the Broward supervisor destroyed all the paper ballots in violation of federal and state criminal statutes, felonies. And she admitted to it in videotaped depositions, sworn depositions. The judge in our public records lawsuit granted a summary judgment and in a 10-page order concluded that the Broward Supervisor of Elections violated all these statutes and even concealed the ballot destruction for more than 2 months from the court after destroying the ballots. So this is like an open and shut case. I mean, it's like I'm handing over a criminal prosecution to law enforcement authorities with a nice bow tied on it. And we're still waiting for a criminal investigation, which is astounding in and of its own right.
Yeah, well, you have speculated to me because they're a Republican, governor, Republican Secretary of State. You would think that they would want to ding it to the Democrats, but yet they haven't. So tell the viewers what your reasoning is for why they don't.
Well, it wasn't my reasoning. It's a lawyer who was working for me who was very well connected in Republican circles, and he was mystified. He had spoken to the U.S. attorney for almost 2 hours, shared all of our information. It's an open and shut case, and it sounded like the U.S. attorney would prosecute or start an investigation. Then he went up to Washington, D.C. for a week of meetings at the Justice Department, came back, and suddenly it's on the back burner. So the Republicans always sort of had some kind of an excuse. Rick Scott, the governor, we were told didn't want to do it because he was in an election himself. He's running for the Senate. But at the end of the day, my lawyer said it's really that the Republicans have the same friends that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democrats do, the same corporate backers. the kind of big corporate interests that have been running Florida politics for decades, the big sugar families that own these, they're billionaires, and the Florida Power and Light and its parent corporation, NextEra. The fossil fuel industry is very, very powerful here too. So we haven't gotten justice from the Republicans. I wrote to all the Democratic Party officials in Miami-Dade and Broward County and in Tallahassee, laid out the case. Here's the videotaped deposition. Here's Brenda Snipes saying, I did it. I destroyed the ballots. It's everything but a photograph of her with a blowtorch burning the ballots, And not a single Democratic Party official even returned my calls or my emails with all this information. Not even a thank you, we'll get back to you, nothing. And that was it. That was the last straw for me. I had it. I'm so glad that I left the party and I'm running as an independent. I'll say it was an easy decision here because of the demographics. When you have less than 25% Republicans, I know Wasserman Schultz's camp still tries to say, you vote for Tim Canova, he's a spoiler. If you vote for him, you're going to get a Republican. In this district, there's not a chance in hell. It's like if there's any district in the United States of America where an independent can win, it might be right here, right now.
Now, let me ask you this. You've gotten a lot of help from Movement for a People's Party. I've seen them. Yeah. They have you on. They promote you all the time because they're very vested in showing that a third party can win in this country. I'm wondering if you're getting support from other entities that are not resistant to third parties, such as Democratic Socialists of America and Our Revolution chapters in your community.
2 Our Revolution chapters have endorsed us. The Broward County chapter and the Miami-Dade has a chapter that's also affiliated with the Labor Community Alliance. The Green Party of Florida has endorsed us. So the Progressive Independent Party has endorsed. So it is happening around the country and here in Florida that there are these groups that are hungering for some alternative to the duopoly. And I've welcomed all their support. Movement for a People's Party has stepped up, and they have been making phone calls and writing postcards into the district. There are MPP people here on the ground in the district that are among our most loyal and hardworking volunteers, knocking door to door and doing all kinds of canvassing. And some are coming back into town for the election. I know there are some Greens and some people from Progressive Independent Party that have been also doing the same, actually coming to the district from out of state, helping us canvass. It's exciting. This campaign is different from the last time. We don't have anywhere near the kind of financial resources we did last time. And I think it's a number of factors. It's not a presidential election year, but it's also clear that the powers that be have tried to put roadblocks up in our way every step of the way. There's certainly a media blackout that didn't exist for me 2 years ago. 2 years ago, maybe it was the drama of, I'm the mini Bernie going after the mini Hillary and all that stuff. But I was on MSNBC and Fox and CNN a lot. And I think every time I went on, it helped our fundraising quite a lot, small donations from around the country. Now there's literally a blackout, I'm sure, and it's a lot of people around the country don't even know we're running again. And there have been other roadblocks. I think social media, we've been throttled and shadow banned and all that. So we don't have the financial resources, but we still have a ton of volunteers, and we have name recognition that, to me, it's gratifying, maybe a little surprising. After the last election ended, I stayed very involved. We started a community action group called Progress for All. We stayed very active on environmental issues in particular, and also a lot of economic and racial justice issues. And a lot of folks remember us from that and, kept the name recognition growing, and people saw we were fighting the good fight. But also the fights against the Broward Supervisor of Elections did not go unnoticed among Republicans who have had perennial issues with the Broward Supervisor, from voter purging to opening up absentee ballots in the not in the presence of a canvassing board. The Republicans just won on summary judgment against the Broward Supervisor's Office on that. So I'm very gratified to see our name recognition is very high, that we're seen as the only way to defeat Wasserman Schultz. The Republican is not. In fact, a Republican news outlet called the Floridian Press had a piece a couple of weeks ago saying that Wasserman Schultz is in hot water and she may be facing a historic loss. And I start reading the article expecting them to talk about the Republican, which I would have thought would have been nonsense. And it was quite the opposite. It was the Republican stands no chance, that Tim Canova is the one who can do this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you how, what steps, if any, you're taking to make sure that she doesn't steal this from you again.
Yeah, we have been very engaged with some of the nation's top election integrity experts, such as John Brakey and his whole team at Election Audit USA, and some of the nation's top recount lawyers, including Chris Sauter. These folks are keeping a very watchful eye, 2 eyes on Broward County right now. And I think you can expect a lawsuit very soon, imminently, in federal court, asking the federal court to issue a writ of mandamus to direct the county supervisors to do their jobs. Not just maintaining paper ballots, but making sure the digital scanned images get imported into their database. These folks are going to be, I think, ready to sue for a recount. I'm motivated to do it. I should mention this, that when I qualified to be on the ballot, I went up to Tallahassee and held a small press conference and told the press that we're prepared to sue and to challenge the election results, whether I lose by 1 vote or 10,000 votes. And, you know, in asking for the ballots, again, nobody who loses by, you know, the kind of margin I did, which officially was 13 points, would ever in this country ask to see the ballots. And I guess I didn't give a damn. I'm a tenured law professor. I don't need this job in Congress. I don't care if they're going to call me a sore loser. That was my thinking. I really wanted to know the truth. There are a lot of people who are calling me up and telling me, Tim, I think you won the election. I think they rigged it. I'm like, how would they have rigged it? I lost by too much. No, it would have been the software. It would have been either a hack or it would have been the software was manipulated from the inside. And, you know, I hadn't been unaware of those dynamics in American politics going back almost 20 years to the days of Diebold. So I think it was sort of the academic in me who wants to just know what is the truth, what is happening in our system. And I put the public records request in. And to me, it's so revealing. Why would they throw out the paper ballots, right? They're covering their trail. They'll let me see digital scanned images, but I'm not allowed to inspect the software that created the digital scanned images. That's proprietary. That's the private property of the private software vendors hired by the supervisor of elections.
That's what is the problem in Georgia right now, too. We didn't even have time to get into that in my segment with Greg Palast, but they're using touch screens that they've been using since 2004 right. that do not have a paper trail. And there have been reports, you can Google this, of people voting straight Democratic ticket, except when they look at it, they see that the vote is coming. This is actually Texas. Sorry.
Texas. It's happening.
Yeah, the vote is coming in for Ted Cruz. I'm confusing the two states.
And Texas's elections chief admitted this is happening, and he claims it's a malfunction. It's the fault of the voters for cursoring through their ballots too quickly or something. I tweeted on it, and I said something like, it's been 2 years of nonstop hysteria over Russia, in which we never, you know, the Democratic Party refused to ask the basic questions about how our election machines perhaps are being rigged. And I kind of understand why. If the Democratic establishment is doing it to progressives in primaries, they don't really want to be calling out this problem when it's done to them in a general election. But here we are 2 years after the 2016 shit show, and we've got Beto O'Rourke, who maybe is losing votes in mass to Ted Cruz because of the electronic machinery.
It's interesting. You talked about Russiagate. You know, I was reading the other day that they're not mentioning that anymore. You know, going into this election, all of a sudden we're not talking about Russiagate because it's become a big bust.
Exactly.
I mean,
it's not polling well. It's not focus grouping well. After 2 years of this crap, you know.
Yeah. Speaking of polling and focus grouping, I want to talk to you about another race in Florida because a lot of people in the progressive community are talking about this Andrew Gillum race and how he had a great line the other night when he was in this thing with DeSantis. He said, the racists are calling you a racist.
Right.
But aside from that, you know, he's back down on Medicare for all. He's anti-BDS. He's campaigning with Hillary and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, although I think the Hillary thing fell through. I remember when he tweeted that out, I looked at all the responses, and out of like 1,200 responses to that tweet, maybe only 4 of them thought that was a good idea. Yeah. Everybody else was like, what are you doing, man? You know? I
think he met with Hillary, but that one was a private behind closed doors. I think they came to their senses and realized a public appearance just wouldn't look too good.
But what do you think of the way, you know, so many of these candidates, they in the primary, they run to the left, and then when they get the nomination, they go to the center because that's what their consultants do. I think you remember I told you the story that I was in Palm Beach, you know, visiting my mom the day I live streamed your announcement. And I also found out that he was having a fundraiser there, and I offered to go and cover it and do an interview. And they said, no, we're not doing any press there. If you want to come as a guest, meaning if I wanted to pay to go to his fundraiser, I could go. And then I later found out from a Bernie delegate that the consultants that he was using said, oh, no, you can't go on with her. She just live streamed Tim Canova's announcement leaving the Democratic Party. So what is your assessment of the way he's running? And do you think he's still going to win because DeSantis is so bad?
I think he still stands a very good chance of winning, but I do think his campaign ran out of some momentum because of this pivot to the center. And, you know, I look back on this race more than a year ago. I met Andrew for the first time at a Democratic Party event where he and I were the 2 keynote speakers. And I was still a Democrat then. And I liked him from the beginning. I met him several times. And he was saying all the right things. He seemed to be the most progressive in the field. Perhaps they were all pretty establishment and all trying to convince us they were progressive. I'm still hopeful that Andrew, I want him to be a progressive, and maybe he's more progressive than it seems lately. I must say I don't spend much time thinking about it. I've got my hands full with my own race, and, you know, I wish him well, and I wish a lot of Democrats well. There are some very good Democrats running in Florida and elsewhere, but my God, it's tough to be in that party. I think back, what if I had won that primary and they had not stolen it 2 years ago? I would have been under a lot of pressure to be standing up on a stage with Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and the whole bunch of them. And, you know, I had been writing stuff critical of the Clintons for years. I mean, as a law professor, about the way Bill Clinton deregulated Wall Street and many of the other neoliberal reforms during the Clinton administration. And when you're in that party, you know, there's a lot of pressure to close ranks and party loyalty and all that. I must say it's been a very liberating experience to leave the party. And I didn't expect it to be such. I think at the time that I left, it felt rather traumatic. I had identified as a Democrat most of my life. I had worked on Capitol Hill for a couple of years for the late U.S. Senator Paul Tsongas, a Democrat from Massachusetts. I identified with the party of Roosevelt and Kennedy and their programs. So I was not particularly happy at the time when I left the party. But in the months since, and especially in recent weeks, it feels wonderful. It feels like I'm able to speak to all the voters in this district. We go out canvassing door to door. We go out to the early voting sites. I've got people right across the spectrum who come up to me and tell me they're voting for me, and they tell me why. And there are an awful lot of Republicans. And I think that's what this country needs. It needs more of these kinds of independent campaigns that appeal across the spectrum. There's something very troubling to many Americans, the way the Republicans and the Democrats, although they're bought by many of the same interests, for public consumption, they hate each other and they go at each other, you know, with claws, and it becomes so divisive that there's not a real discussion going on about the issues. Instead, it feels like there's attacks and counterattacks that are crafted by consultants who are in bed with the lobbyists. It's all a game, a kabuki game.
Well, Bernie Sanders was out here last weekend, and he did a rally for Barbara Lee, who is going to win handily. And fortunately, Barbara Lee endorsed Jovanka Beckles, who is a super progressive person running against Buffy Wicks. And Buffy Wicks had the name Buffy the Bernie Slayer because in 2016, she ran Hillary's campaign in California. And Jovanka is a member of the Richmond Progressive Alliance. And Bernie, the second time I met Bernie was when he came out to endorse them, her and Gail McLaughlin and the other candidate in 2014. So everybody was wondering whether Bernie was going to endorse Jovanka because it was a Dem-on-Dem race. And he came out, she was on the stage with him. I, left 4 voicemails for Jeff Weaver, begging him to ask, Bernie to do this. I said, this is so symbolic. Jovanka is corporate free. She's Medicare for all. Right. Buffy Wicks is taking, she's taking money from the Charter School Association, from the real estate developers, from the tech billionaires,
So did Bernie stay neutral?
Well, actually, yesterday morning, he announced that he endorsed Jovanka. So I'm back on the Bernie train. I had gotten off the Bernie train because I was so pissed. He goes down to San Diego where he endorses this guy, Amar Kampa-Najjar, who's running against a Republican, this guy, Duncan Hunter, who's been indicted. He and his wife embezzled all this money from their campaign. It's a cut and dried case. Even the San Diego Union Tribune, which is a conservative paper, endorsed Amar. So Bernie endorses Amar, even though it's a plus whatever Republican district, like plus 20, plus 30, plus 40. It's crazy how Republican it is. And Bernie comes and endorses here, not the close races like Katie Hill and Katie Porter and Harley Rauda and Gil Cisneros. He did endorse Mike Levin, who is going to win for Darrell Issa's seat. But he endorses this guy, Amar, who worked for Obama. And then he was a Clinton supporter in 2016. And he snubs Bernie. He doesn't even show up at the rally. Can you imagine somebody snubbing Bernie Sanders? I mean, this guy is going to go down. He's going to go down bad. And it just goes to show. And his answer is, because Bernie doesn't poll well in my district. I mean, we got to get rid of all these consultants, right, Tim?
I must say, it's one of the reasons this campaign in some ways is a little more enjoyable than the last one. I had three consultants inside the Beltway that were helping me with just sort of the infrastructure, the sending out the fundraising emails, the social media platform, and direct mail. And we had a lot of money coming in, so it seemed okay, and they were with me from the beginning. All 3 of them ended up completely, I don't know how to say it, unreliable is an understatement. They could not have defected quicker when they saw the writing on the wall. And one of them convinced me to hire a communications consultant for a few weeks inside the Beltway. And it turns out she was actually being paid by Debbie Wasserman Schultz's super PAC, the Patriot Majority super PAC, the whole time.
Wow.
I came to realize if there's a consultant, even if he or she is singing the right tune when you speak to them, if they're inside that Beltway, if they're around that Washington, D.C. corridor, they've got longstanding ties and allegiances. And
Tim, we've reached the end of our time for the show. I wish you great luck.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate
I will be watching.
I appreciate that, Lauren. And thanks for having me on. And that 99%, I was in Occupy LA myself.
All right. Take care, Tim.
Thank you, Lauren. Take care.
I'm going to be doing my show on Thursday. It's going to be the last episode of a series that I've been doing called Will the Real Progressive Please Stand Up? And I'm going to be interviewing another local candidate for state assembly, Alan Gerasi, who is running down in the San Diego area, who has not gotten a lot of help from the Democratic Party. Big surprise. And then in the second half of the show, I'm going to be doing my endorsements, who I plan to vote for, the propositions, the judges. I've been doing a lot of research in this. So that's going to be Thursday night. If you're watching for the first time, please follow me here on Facebook. And also you can follow me on Twitter, Lauren_Steiner, and subscribe to my YouTube channel where I upload all of my shows and live streams. Let's all make sure that we vote. And until you next see me, keep fighting.